Hi, everyone. I'm Arun Chandrasekhar from Microsoft. I'm the Senior Program Manager for Azure DevOps. And this is Damien, Caro. He's the Technical Evangelist for DevOps on Azure.
Good morning.
So today we're just going to go through a whirlwind tour of everything that we're building on Jenkins, as well as some reasonably exciting things that are coming in the future. Primarily, we'll go through the storage, the work we're doing around Azure Storage plugin in Jenkins, and the new version of the Slave plugin, as well as our support for containers. And we'll be announcing a new portal that we're going to launch, and the roadmap of where we're going to go over the next 6 months. So one of the interesting things that I noticed yesterday, there's a conference going on here called the GitHub Universe, the GitHub conference in San Francisco. And there was a pleasant surprise that Microsoft is the #1 open source contributor to GitHub as compared to all other organizations, which is interesting because this shows sort of the emphasis that we are shifting from sort of a platform company to sort of an open cloud company, where we focus more on open source being our primary strength. From something that was like years ago, something that was not our core strength. An interesting project, just to start off, that I don't know how many of you are aware of Hololens, a show of hands. A few guys. So Hololens is basically an augmented reality platform, sort of like your Samsung Gear or your Google Glass. It's basically it's different from virtual reality in the sense that you can mix reality with virtual reality. It's sort of a combination of the two. It's called augmented reality. Interestingly, we worked with NASA on this project, and this was an open source project based on .NET Core libraries. This was released like some time back. And this is a quote from Parker, who's the engineer in NASA who collaborated with us. It's really cool to notice that what we're doing here is the Jenkins continuous integration system is used for sort of both to compile the images from the Mars rover and sort of run the image processing jobs downstream. So effectively what this gives you is the ability to do what you see in the picture there, which is you can, if you go to NASA JPL Center, you can effectively use the HoloLens, and if you're an astrophysicist or a scientist, you can effectively roam around Mars as the Mars rover did, like with a slightly staggered delay. So effectively, you're roaming around Mars on Earth. So which is kind of pretty cool, I thought. And this kind of shows the power of collaboration with, if you use pure open, like we have a pure open source project, which was sort of, HoloLens was exposed as an open source SDK. You can consume it with .NET Core. And then Jenkins was used in combination with this. So this is like a really powerful partnership that takes us into really futuristic kind of scenarios. So let's start a little bit with just talking about how we are making life simple for Azure plugins. So as of now, we started with we had a couple of Azure plugins, one for spinning up slaves and the other one for storage. Now, Damien will sort of talk about a few things that we're doing to simplify your experience in Jenkins with Azure. Go ahead.
So to start with that, the first element that I want to talk about is how we've simplified the connection you can make from your Jenkins environment to Azure. And nowadays, you can connect to Azure in a secure way, but it's kind of cumbersome to get through all the keys, get all the IDs and the GUIDs. So we have worked to create a script that will actually bring all those secrets in a script, and then you just copy and paste that info into either the UI or the XML that you're using. Let me show you how it works. So if internet works. So I've started to run the script. As you can see, it starts by asking some questions. The first one that is important is it asks for your authentication. And we use for that the device login URL from ak.ms. You have a code You can keep that code, you can copy it, I've already used it. It's a one-time code that doesn't work anymore. And then you authenticate, and it will let the command line interface that you have on the machine to go through. It brings then all the subscription I have a bunch of them, and we can continue that. I'm going to enter the number 9, which is my demo subscription. It brings me the different storage account that I have, and let's take number 15. Will provision storage account, and then will allow me to use that account with all the proper information in my Jenkins. I already have configured that script before. Internet is not responding. But it also provides you the URLs, the widths that you will need to connect, you will use to connect to Azure from your Jenkins master. Internet is
switch
blocked.
to the dashboard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what he's basically showing is he's already done this before, but what it would do is it would take all the secrets that are needed for your particular Jenkins configuration, and it would effectively input it automatically into the storage plugin, the slave plugin, and so on. So you don't have to go and figure out how to use Azure AD, set up your Azure account, and figure out how to configure that in your Jenkins implementation. So you just use Azure CLI, and it's already done for you out of the box.
Okay. We're connecting to the cloud.
Okay. Do you want to switch to slide?
No,
okay.
here it is. So here it is. The storage account details will appear here. So it brings the storage account name, the key, and the endpoint URL that Jenkins is going to use to actually access that storage environment. The other piece that it does, it brings through the script all those elements, and then you just have to copy and paste the element. So the subscription ID, that is your own subscription, the client ID that actually authenticates your Jenkins environment in Azure Active Directory, and then will make the connection, the password, which is a super long secret key that is hidden here, but it will come in clear in the result of the script. And then you have the authentication, the OAuth endpoint, which will also be used to access your Azure environment and be allowing you or allowing Jenkins to provision VMs and do other things that we will see through the session today. Once you've done that, you have the nice little verify configuration that verify that the keys you've entered actually work on your Azure environment in the cloud.
So that was basically the script. So now the next thing is we're just going to go through a pipeline that Damien will go through first.
Yeah. So we are going through the pipeline, and the pipeline will go through the downloading some artifacts, some elements from Azure. We will use the storage plugin. I will walk you through the storage plugin in a second. We are going to build the application on different slaves that are running on Azure as virtual machines. They're running on Ubuntu. We'll come to that details in a second. And then we will upload the artifact to Azure Storage. Those artifacts can then be used across different data centers, across the world, depends, or whenever you want.
And one of the cool things here is that all the plugins that we have automatically wrap into Jenkins V2, so you don't have to do anything extra. You can use them in your jobs, and you can automatically use them in your V2 pipelines without any changes or migration work involved. So everything you have today with storage and slave is fully supported in the V2 pipeline without writing any additional wrappers or scripts and so on. One of the things I want to talk about is like you would have, those of you in the keynote would have looked at Kosuke when he said that we are moving to Azure. So basically the Jenkins infrastructure itself is moving to Azure. So this pipeline that you saw, you'll be wondering like, okay, what's the big deal? I'm just uploading to storage. It is pretty powerful because that enabled this scenario to happen. So all of Jenkins infrastructure is about a few terabytes of data all the time flowing into storage and being shared across multiple geographies, and the kind of breadth of data center regions that we have the Azure data centers in will give you the ability to now push your, effectively all your shared things and use your Azure Storage as your primary repository and make that enable a whole bunch of really powerful scenarios. So now Damien will talk about the storage plugin a little bit.
So the storage is currently in the version 0.3.1. It allows you, as I said earlier, to push and pull content from Azure Storage. So you can think of Azure Storage as unlimited storage in the cloud, and the plugin will upload packages, artifacts, binaries, you name them. But it can also, it can upload those artifacts. It can allow you to geographically replicate those data across the different data centers we have in Azure. Basically, the idea is you deploy once, and then you share once, and then you deploy multiple times. On the download piece, you can have repositories on Azure that are shared across your organization. You can have dependencies that are available on Azure Storage, and then the plugin will download them before you actually do a build, for example. And it will ensure that that dependency is unique and is at the latest version across your organization. That's one of the scenarios that we can think that enables.
You want to demo the?
Yeah. Let me show you a little bit how that works. So I'm going to switch to this one. So we have the pipeline that is configured, and it has 4 steps. The first one I'm going to go through is the downloading dependencies from Azure Storage. So if we go down, that's what the plugin is allowing you to do. You define the storage account name, which is basically a unique URL that is hidden here. So the storage account name is where you will have your data. The data are organized in that storage account by containers. So a container is like a folder, if you think of it. Here we have the download source folder or container, and then you can define the files you want to download. It uses the traditional syntax that you're very familiar with. In that case, we're just downloading all the files that are available on the download source in the DevOps Integration 1 storage account name. If I'm switching to the number 3, we do exactly the same thing, except in that case, it's going to be a post-build app operation, and it will upload the data to the same storage account name, but in a different container. In that case, we've built a WAR file, and we are uploading that WAR file to this container. Arun, you want to talk about the .NET?
Yeah. So one of the interesting projects that we use, like Microsoft uses Jenkins pretty heavily on, is the .NET Core libraries. All of the .NET Core libraries runs on a couple of Jenkins instances, Jenkins masters on Azure. One of them handles CI, and we also do we do perf testing and things like that on the other instance. Because we have a lot of jobs, we handle about 5,000 to 7,000 jobs a day, and a large chunk of this is actually there's more open source contributors, non-Microsoft contributors to this project than Microsoft contributors. We've ended up building everything using the job DSL. For those of you who are not familiar with job DSL, it's basically you cannot define. It's nice to define each job in the UI in Jenkins, but it's far more interesting if you have a huge number of jobs, in order to be having this sort of reusable template, like a core job template, and then sort of programmatically spin up a bunch of jobs. So that the job DSL gives you that with a bunch of scripting. So it's completely sort of a dynamic system that handles 95% of the job configuration. And most of the resources are rapidly spun up because they're automatically allocated as Azure VMs. So this uses the slave plugin that we have today. But there is some real hardware attached. So one of the beautiful things in Azure is you can do huge data disk attached to your master. and we just leveraged that a lot. And now we even have premium storage with SSD, so you can also use that if you want. So that gives us the ability to do a whole bunch of stuff, which is kind of not the most recommended thing to scale at this level, but if once you're doing this with brute force, you really need a data disk, hook it up to master, push a whole bunch of stuff there, and that works really well for us. Because we're able to easily scale up to 300 plus VMs using our current slave v1 plugin during the day, and then we sort of scale it down to 100 machines at night. So one of the most important things here is because we are using Azure slaves, our costs are drastically lower than obviously having it on-prem in our private lab that we used to, because now we can just spin up these things, spin them down, and you don't have to spend compute cycles when you don't need them, right? So that's kind of the big advantage of that. And now Damien will talk about the next version of this plugin that we're going to be launching.
So the next version, what we call the Slave v2, which is in limited preview right now. I'm just skipping to the end of it. If you're interested, you can contact us. We have an email address where you can reach out to us if you want to try it. But what the plugin v2 does, it deploys controlled slaves as Azure virtual machines. What it does, it uses actually the resource manager, the Azure Resource Manager APIs that has enhanced performances. So when you deploy one virtual machine, it will take a certain amount of time. What this version of the plugin does, if you also want to deploy 100 virtual machines, it will take about roughly the same time because those tasks are being parallelized. The V1 was actually going sequential, and that was taking forever to deploy those 100 virtual machines. Now, because they're parallel, it just takes a few minutes. To create those images, we use what we call images that are either in the marketplace, which are images that Microsoft offers to you, standard images, or images that come through partners. But you can also create your own image. So let's say you have defined a bunch of packages you want on a Ubuntu VM, and you have those packages ready, you have the image ready, and you want to reuse it for whatever reason. Well, you can actually upload that image secured in your environment, in your subscription. No one else can access it. And you can use that image for your slaves in Azure. It's a very good scenario. It's a very good approach to do a lift and shift approach, which means you take your knowledge that you have on your data center today, no matter if you run VMware or Hyper-V, and then you take that knowledge and bring it to Azure. And with limited learning curve, you're ready to do that at scale. The other thing is, because those are in the cloud, whenever you don't need those slaves anymore, you destroy them, and you cut the cost. Let me show you a bit how it works.
And one of the interesting things is, because this is, the parallelism that we have is actually on the Azure front door, so ARM is effectively the second version of Azure, which uses one big front door service that hyperscales. So what that means is not only are you able to parallelize, you're able to parallelize to pretty much the amount of cores that your subscription support, which could be up to 10,000 cores, right? So that really makes it really powerful.
So I'm going to look at the job number 2. That one is actually executing the build step on the slaves from the pipeline I've showed you before. Oh, sorry. That's what I wanted to show you. How do we define which slave we run on? Well, that's pretty easy. You just need to type the name or the label of the slave that you are running in Azure. So when you create those slaves, and I will show you how you create them, you tag them. You tag them, and in that case, it's Ubuntu. And I want to say, well, here my job needs to run on Ubuntu VMs. Now, let me show you where we configure all of that. That's here. Oops. So the first thing we do, we add what we call the virtual machine template. The template has a name, a description. This is kind of blah, 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 blah. What is important is the label, and you see here that the label match what I have defined into my build. Then you define where you want to run those virtual machines and what are the sizes. We want to run them in West US, but if you want to run them in Singapore, fine, you can run them in Singapore. If you want to run them into, I'm trying to think of data centers in Europe, for example, you can run them in Europe through the same mechanism. Then you have the size, and they go from basic, cheap. My boss was not very happy for me to spend millions of dollars, but if you really want to go with very, very big machines, you can do that. Then you say how long you want to keep those slaves. In our case, it's about 60 minutes. And then, as I told you, you can use your custom image, which is exactly your own image that you have created. Or, in our case, we've been using Ubuntu Server 14.04 that is published by Canonical. It's a partner we work for to have that image on the Azure Marketplace. And finally, you define the initial script. So that script will be run when the machine boots in Azure. In our case, we install Java and Git because we need those tools to do the build of the application we're using for the demo. But you can do whatever script you want here, and those scripts will be executed at boot time. And finally, you define the password and the username that is going to be used. We don't use root in in VMs in Azure.
And primarily, one of the things you'll see is like the configuration is reasonably boring and simple. We are trying to keep it like there's no complexity around how you configure the plugin. We are hiding all the complexity of generating the ARM template, figuring out how to do your secrets, how to maintain the sort of translate from your authentication into Azure without you worrying about it. So we try to avoid exposing some of that complexity to you so that you keep it simple. But there's an advanced button there. If you click that, you can also do like non-username password-based authentication with OAuth and so on, because based on the OAuth endpoint that you had configured. So the next thing is talking a little bit more about the Jenkins infrastructure on Azure. Those of you who came to the Birds of Feather session yesterday, you'd have met with Tyler, who kind of mentioned how Azure, as they start using Azure, they're starting to use storage, compute, some of the more advanced services we have like CDN, and so on to do Jenkins infra on Azure. But one of the most interesting things that I just learned yesterday was that he's actually also using ACS with Swarm pretty heavily. So that's pretty amazing because ACS is sort of Azure Container Service. It's a new service that we have, and that enables you to sort of containerize your application, your Docker image, and push it onto either a Swarm cluster or onto a Mesos cluster, right? So let's talk a little bit more about how Swarm is a reasonably simple, beautiful API that you can just use to configure. It doesn't take much time to figure out how to configure Swarm with Docker. Mesos, on the other hand, is a slightly more complex beast. So Jenkins does have a Marathon plugin today, but you'll have to figure out how to do your provisioning of your ACS cluster on your own in Azure. What we are trying to do is to simplify that aspect of it, and for that, we're releasing the ACS plugin in limited preview today, and you can sort of contact us at the alias below, at the email below to get access to the Azure Container Service plugin. This effectively simplifies your, pretty much eliminates your need to do a marathon configuration on Azure, because Azure Container Service takes care of that, and Damien is now going to show you how it works.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, how it works. If you have nothing in the cloud, the container plugin will actually create the cluster for you on your behalf, and then you will be able to deploy containers. It's a two-step process. You create the whole cluster, and then you deploy the container based on the Marathon configuration file. Again, we leverage the ARM API, which simplifies the process and make it more efficient in terms of speed and our complexities. Just a couple of scenarios that we think are useful here. You deploy containers to Azure, and you run them directly from your pipeline, as an example, because it also works with the pipeline. And it simplifies the complexity, as Arun said. Let me show you one demo here that I've built yesterday. It's fresh, so
it's a very fresh demo that he did probably till yesterday at 1 a.m. or something.
Yeah, I was finishing that yesterday night, so you will see the builds that haven't been running.
So you can see that's why it's still limited preview. We are working on it.
let me reopen the tunnel because I know it was disconnected through the connection error we had this morning. Okay, so here's my job. So that one is doing a simple push of Nginx, the basic container for Nginx from Docker Hub, into ACS cluster. So what we do, very simple. I'm downloading configuration file from Jenkins World 2016 with a container name ACS Jenkins. I have two files over there. One is my public key, which allows the connection, and the other one is the configuration file, the configuration file for the Marathon environment. So it's in Azure in the storage. Then, as you can see, I have my Azure profile configuration, so it has a subscription ID like I've showed you for the slaves and the other plugins we have. Follows the Azure Container Service Profile configuration. So basically, it's the same thing. You define where you want to run the cluster. You define a DNS name prefix. I used a GUID to make sure it was unique, and I didn't have to go through the whole configuration multiple times. Then you define the agent count, the VM size, and the admin username. So that will define how many agents are going to be running on the Azure Container Service. And then you have the master count. And when we talk agent, we're not talking agent in terms of Jenkins mentality, but more the agent from the DCOS approach. Number of masters, 1, and then we have the public key to connect. And here, I'm just getting the configuration file, the SSH private file path, and the password for the private key. Those will allow to configure the Marathon environment and deploy the right containers in that environment. So the configuration file that I'm using is this one. It's very simple. I am using the Nginx Docker image from Docker Hub. That is the file that I'm passing to Marathon through ACS. And that's the file that is downloaded by the plugin. Then you define the ports, and all of that is basically done on your behalf through the connection we have with ACS. So it will expose port 80 from the container to port 80 on the host, and that will be exposed at port 80 on the environment. Just keeping an eye on the time. Okay. Now.
So one of the things with ACS is that it also gives you the ability to do something called like DCOS, which is basically sort of like a high-level abstraction on top of your orchestrator and all the different things. Think of it as a platform for containerized services that includes a universe, sort of like a marketplace, where you can also have Jenkins and Spark and a whole bunch of Cassandra and so on that you can now launch in a containerized fashion directly onto this cluster that you've created, right? So the beauty of that is that you don't need to worry about the internals of how and where these things come from, where is the Docker Hub location of this. The versioning of this is kind of kept up to date, and you just install the packages that you want, right? Yeah. So you can have sort of a more sophisticated platform on top of this, and all of this is now open source. DCOS is not part of, it's not part of the Azure Container Service deployment that you get. So you get this dashboard for free. And if you go to the dashboard one, you can also see things like you can do some basic analytics and so on. So it'll show you things like CPU allocation, memory allocation. So it's a pretty sophisticated platform that you get, which is why people choose to do Mesos with Marathon configuration rather than do other sort of orchestrators, because you get all this additional stuff for free, and it also makes it more enterprise grade and more production ready.
So now if we go to Marathon, I just want to show you that I have no application deployed on my Marathon cluster right now. Hopefully, network is going to work with us. So no applications have been created. What I'm going to do here, I'm simply going to run my script, or my I'm going to build my job. It takes about 2 seconds to show. There it is. The result is very simple. It's a success. It has collected the configuration file from the Azure Container Storage and then has pushed that configuration to ACS. Now, if I go to Marathon, my Jenkins file is up to date. It's there. And if I go to the URL that is exposed, it's running.
And that's the beauty of containers, that now you have this super rapid way to deploy things. I mean, you get all the goodness of containers, and you haven't done a single piece of Azure configuration except for the script that you ran and the configuration in the plugin, right, which is radically simpler than if you wanted to set this up on your own.
So again, Azure Container Service plugin is in preview. So if you're interested in trying it, just send us an email, and we'll follow up.
And we can probably show the hidden one.
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah.
The next one.
Yep.
This one, yeah. So with this, basically you can start doing a little bit more sophisticated scenarios in Jenkins itself, because now we have Jenkins V2, which has a pipeline. So you can do things where a developer checks in his code, he builds his app, like all he does is checks in his code. So at that point, you can have Jenkins take over, build the app into the image once you do your standard build jobs and everything. And you can have your own private container registry in Azure just to store that image and reuse the same image across all your stages. So now you have a complete immutable flow with containers. And you can choose to use Swarm, just using the standard Docker plugin that exists today, or you can use Marathon, just using the standard Marathon plugin that exists today, or you can use ACS plugin that we're coming out with to enable this entire flow end-to-end without needing to sort of go out of the Jenkins world. Effectively, you just have to, you can do the whole thing end-to-end and interact with Azure. And we are really trying to enable this scenario and start smoothing all the rough edges, which is why we are currently in limited preview, where you can now do this whole thing without worrying about how to configure the registry, how to configure the container, how to configure Marathon, Mesos, and so on. So this is sort of the simple mechanism that gives you the consistency across stages and lets you do Docker containers with very little friction. Okay, so basically what we are trying to do here, you've seen a bunch of these plugins. So what we're really trying to do is to build out sort of a image, Azure Jenkins image in the marketplace. And this is going to be public preview very shortly, like over the next few weeks. And what you'll get with that is basically a mechanism for you to quickly learn and understand how to use like sort of Jenkins with Azure, with all the plugins that you saw today, such as how do you use agents with VMs, agents with ACS, how do you use storage, how do you use, in the future, web apps once you start like enabling that. But that doesn't mean that you can only use it on an Azure-hosted Jenkins. You can also have your own Jenkins master on-premise and do the exact same thing. You can just have agent plugins. You can have deploy plugins that just go from your local on-prem or some other, wherever you've installed your master, and push it out there. So you should look out for the Azure Jenkins image in the marketplace to come up pretty soon. And that doesn't mean that we want this to be the sort of your production deployment of Azure-hosted Jenkins. All that we're doing here is giving you the ability to learn how to use Azure with Jenkins. But then when you want to really go, okay, you want to get into an enterprise-grade deployment, then we already have a whole bunch of Jenkins images in the marketplace, including the different CloudBees images that constantly get updated to the latest Jenkins platform in them, as well as a bunch of images like from HP and Octopus Deploy and JFrog that leverage Jenkins on Azure and will give you that integration as well. So this is some of the things that we have. Now, finally, what I want to talk a little bit about is it's kind of confusing for like anybody who's just starting with a new cloud, like with a public cloud like Azure, or any cloud for that matter, to understand, okay, I'm familiar with a particular tool like Jenkins, and how do I now use this with an Azure service like, say, VMs or containers in a particular scenario? That is, I have a scenario which could be CI or CD or some specific scenario. So how does it work? So I want to be able to try. What we're going to do is we're going to have, like if you go to that ak.ms/try DevOps, we will have it. I mean, right now we have it, but it's pretty raw. We just started developing it like recently. Eventually, we're going to have a mechanism where you can try common Jenkins scenarios on Azure for free. So you don't have to go and sign up for an Azure subscription. You don't have to. You just go into that, and I'll show you if the internet supports us. So I think I have it already on another.
Yep. Here it is.
Yeah. So basically, what we're trying to do here, this is pretty raw, but think of the idea here is you come into this sort of aka.ms/try DevOps, where we have a portal. Forget about the fidelity of it, but just what we'll have is you can select a tool. We'll also add a new tab where you can select a service. So if you're familiar with Azure Container Service, you can come from there. And then you can basically select Jenkins today. We're going to add a few more like Spinnaker and Ansible and SaltStack, Chef, whatever you name it, right? Once you're there, if you pick Jenkins, you would get to something like, what are the different scenarios here? So you could have things like provision, continuous integration. Actually, let me show you the VSTS one. That'll give you an idea of, like, it could be, you could do things that I want to provision things using ARM templates. We have another bakery like Packer called Azure DevTest Labs. You can bake your images using that. And then you can do continuous integration. You can do a bunch of scenarios there. And then you can do continuous delivery, right? So similarly for Jenkins, all the things that we just showed you, you can basically go to each of those scenarios and try them out. And if you pick one of the scenarios, like say the upload files to storage, basically you'll get to a screen that will give you detailed instructions of exactly how to do this and all the related work that you need to do to get to the next level. This includes things like an Azure Quick Start template on GitHub, where you can now go and spin up that Jenkins Marketplace image that I talked about, which will already have the thing ready for you in your own subscription if you want to do it. But if you want to just try it out, we're also going to have the ability to do something like, this is not here right now, but if you click this, you would effectively, right now go to some documentation, but think of it as when you try it as a guest, you'll actually directly get into the pipeline that you just saw here. So what that means is you don't have to launch an Azure Marketplace image in your subscription, configure it, run all that CLI. We'll have that all done for you. You can play around with this. It'll probably be time-bombed for an hour or so, and you can try it out there for free. And then once you're comfortable with it, then you can go ahead and do the sort of use the Marketplace image or the Quick Start template to do more rigorous stuff. And then once you're ready to go to production, then you can pick any of the sort of Marketplace images that we have. So that's kind of the flow that we are trying to enable there. And we still have some time. I'll also quickly show you, like we talked about containers, but a lot of you still have VMs. So how would you do the immutable flow that we talked with containers with VMs? So for this, we are also integrating with Spinnaker. How many of you are familiar with Spinnaker? Okay, very few. So Spinnaker is basically a Netflix project for a continuous delivery, like a release pipeline, primarily for immutable VM images. So Netflix has been using this for over 7 years as Asgard that works on AWS. Spinnaker is sort of the cloud-agnostic version of this. And what we have done is we have partnered with Netflix and Google to build out basically the AWS is built by Netflix. We build out the Azure integration to VM scale sets, and there's also an integration with Google Compute Engine and Kubernetes. So with this, what you get is effectively the same flow that I talked about for Docker. You can do the exact same thing, but instead of Docker, you would use Packer. And Packer is basically a mechanism for you to bake your application into an image. And it's a complete open source, again, cloud-agnostic format. If you wanted to use something that's Azure-specific, we have our own bakery called Azure DevTest Labs, where you can do exactly the same thing. But if you wanted to choose Packer, we have integrated the ability to bake Azure VHDs into Packer. It's right now available in the Packer master branch. The next version of Packer will have it native. And then you can basically bake the app into an image instead of like you put it in a VHD, and now you'll deploy to test stage and production, again using the same image. So that gives you the benefits of immutable all the way to production to ensure that there's no change in what you have across test stage to production. But it also gives you zero downtime upgrades. So what we've done in Spinnaker is that you can effectively say, I want to just do a deployment, upgrade my new image into the VM scale set. think of VM scales as kind of like an auto-scaling group of VMs. So you can effectively throw this, and what we've done under the covers is we use a load balancer with Azure, which we call Azure Application Gateway. And what it'll do is it'll drain the connections to V1, and it'll sort of resurface the connections to V2, all under the covers. So all you have to do is you just use the release pipeline and say, I want to bake, and then I want to deploy to Spinnaker. And in Jenkins, we have obviously you have like the Packer integration already built in, and you can just leverage that to do your you can do your CI, and you can do a whole, like the advantage of Spinnaker is it is natively supports Jenkins. You can do a whole bunch of Jenkins jobs and sort of at any stage you want to run more tests and as you go, right? So this gives you the immutable flow even without containers, for those of you who are comfortable with doing it with VMs. So finally, just to close on this, what we have currently available is the Azure Storage plugin that we talked about, and we're obviously going to beef it up to support all the big scenarios that we have with NASA and Jenkins infrastructure and so on. And we also have the Slave V1 plugin that is already pretty cool. It does like up to 300 slaves comfortably. And we can also do, as we talked about, over the next few weeks, we're going to have the Azure Jenkins image in the marketplace that has all these plugins embedded in it, including the limited preview ones. And then we will have the configuration script available in GitHub for you. The portal is already available. You go to aka.ms/try-devops, but it's pretty raw right now. We'll be sort of building it, making it more sort of user-friendly and sort of get guys going with it. And then we have limited preview over the fall of the Slave V2 plugin that will let you use ARM with the with slaves, and then the ACS plugin. So all these already exist, and if any of you are interested to join our limited preview, you can do that right now if you just send us an email there. And finally, we have the Jenkins integration with Spinnaker that we're working on, as well as the web apps plugin, so you can deploy to like a PaaS kind of web apps plugin. And Spinnaker already enables scenarios for Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry on Azure for free, so you can do that as well. That's about it. And you can email me if you have any questions, and you can. We have about 2.5 minutes left. You could also take our survey. This is really important for us to choose and prioritize what are the plugins that you guys care the most about, and it will be really valuable if you can take the survey, and you can come to our booth, and we can have some more conversations. And if you have any questions, please let me know. We have another 2.5 minutes. Yep.
Yes.
Yes,
yes.
I just mentioned that in the beginning. I think it came in late.
I'm going to repeat the question. Does the plugins we have support pipeline? And the answer is yes. All the plugins we have support pipeline.
And you can probably show the pipeline view.
Yes.
I think you didn't show that.
I'm going to show it to you as we take the next question.
Sorry? All our plugins are open source. They'll be in the Jenkins GitHub. In the limited preview, they're in an Azure GitHub, but they can give you access to that as well, the source. Yep. You're talking about PowerShell support in the Jenkins V2 pipeline? Yes, that is something that is in our backlog, but it's not for the current fall, but we're definitely working on it. We're waiting for, like, if you look at it now, PowerShell is on Linux as well, and the PowerShell is sort of, you have PowerShell core that is platform agnostic. So we want to make sure that the latest platform that we have works on it, and that's definitely, that's going to happen in the future. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I hear you. So just send me an email. I'll definitely make sure we look at it to prioritize it correctly. So that's the kind of stuff I wanted to get from here, yeah. Any other questions? We good? Do you want to show the pipeline?
Yeah, that's the pipeline, and all the steps we have on the pipeline, thinking of the first one, the build one.
Yeah.
Download dependencies is actually using the storage.
Can they show the pipeline view, I guess?
Yep.
Just show the view. Yeah, we haven't yet
Sorry,
run
it's
anything.
the wrong one. We have two environments.
Yeah, this uses all our plugins, and you'll get this when we do the DevOps integration portal, as well as when you use our Jenkins Marketplace image. This will be embedded in there, so you can play around with it. You can add your own custom stuff into it. Yeah. Thank you. The rest out of time.
Thank you very much.